Hello everyone, Loremaster Sotek here, and we have still tons and tons of questions to get through, so let's just immediately get into it today. Our first question comes from ThewarriorDraganta, who asks, so we've already answered most of your questions, but the one that I will touch on is, have there ever been female orcs in Warhammer Fantasy? Because you've heard that they were more similar to Lord of the Ring orcs originally. And are orcs truly evil in that, are there maybe some good orcs that aren't necessarily just completely destructive wackos? So, first answer is that yes, there were female orcs or greenskins a really long time ago. Like back in, I want to say the late 90s, early 2000s. I can think of one very weird short story. I think that was in the Greenskin 5th or 6th edition book that might have referenced it. But it was changed quite a long time ago. They did exist for a little while. They were not originally a fungoid species to my knowledge. I'm not exactly sure when the transfer happened, because that was before I was either A, before I was born in the early 90s, or B, was before I got into Warhammer, which I got into Warhammer in like 2001. So hopefully that'll answer that aspect. And as there are no good orcs. Orcs and greenskins are not good. They are inherently evil creatures. A lot of the time, it can be difficult to remember they are evil, because from the perspective that we observe their stories, there's almost a detached thing to it where they're genuinely very humorous. You know, most people would agree that greenskins are really funny, and it has a lot to do with their accent and how ridiculous they are, and the fact that they tend to be these just super over the top, exaggerated creatures. But if you ever sit down and really think about how they act and what they do, they are beyond, like, they are irredeemably evil creatures. You know, goblins especially are cruel, sadistic little monsters that get a lot of pleasure out of torturing people by, you know, skinning them alive, cutting off their limbs, taking out their eyes. Skarsnik is very intelligent for a goblin. Well, he's very intelligent compared to a lot of creatures, but for a goblin especially, he's a genius. And he actually has a sense of some complex emotions. And he still, for like literally just giggles, tortures people to just deeply horrifying extents. Orcs are barely any better. Orcs are not going to drag out your death, but all greenskins love is causing suffering, causing destruction, and causing death. That is all they care about. That is their one purpose in existence. So there's no such thing as a good greenskin. They're all horrible creatures. But because they have really silly accents and they're just so exaggerated, they're hysterical. Then we've got, just to name off a few people whose questions we've already answered. Cube, Zernof, got your questions about greenskin physiology. We've already touched on those in previous episodes. Just wanted you to know I saw them. Scorn asks, are Snotlings able to grow like other greenskins? And if so, could they get to a goblin or orc size? Yes, Snotlings grow like all greenskins do. No, they could never get to the size of a goblin. They are so incredibly stupid that it is genuinely amazing to me that Snotlings have the capacity to remember how to breathe. Like, they are really dumb, diminutive creatures. And for one to get to the size of a goblin would mean it would have to be very well taken care of, and it would have to not do something that would result in its own death, which is pretty much impossible for a Snotling. So I would say no. Lazy Captain asks, are greenskins immortal? Maybe? It's kind of a complicated situation, because I think we kind of touched on this yesterday or the day before, but greenskins might be immortal in that they cannot die of old age, to my knowledge. Now, there are some greenskins who are very old. You know, Grimgor is ancient. There are a couple of shamans who are ancient. So, I've never read a story or seen any evidence that a greenskin can die from anything, unless there's an outside force involved, like violence or, you know, a lack of resources or whatever. So I would say in the sense, when it comes to, can greenskins die from old age? I do not believe they can, no. But because of the lifestyle they inherently live, most greenskins are beyond lucky if they make it past, you know, 2 decades. I would say the average life cycle for a greenskin is way below most races because of just how inherently violent they are. Our next question comes in from HappyBot, who asks, "Hey Loremaster, great job on the Q&A on the dwarves. Thanks. If I may ask a question, do greenskins have any rules or taboos that they never break?" Yeah, not a lot. They have one that comes to mind, which is that the only majorly enforced rule among greenskins is that it is really frowned upon to attack or kill shamans, because they are viewed as the speakers and representatives of Gork and Mork, and as a greenskin, you do not piss off Gork and Mork. That is like beyond, that's hardcore sacrilege to them. And that, you know, that kind of, when we talked about Azhag, I think on the first Q&A day, that's kind of a big reason why a lot of greenskins were kind of about Azhag, was that he was so un-orky that many of them took that to be an insult to Gork and Mork. And so that's why there was almost a mutiny building up in his army, but he was so good at winning, they kind of ignored it. But outside of attacking shamans, there's really not any hardcore rules among greenskins. Like, there might be a particular rule for a tribe due to some cultural thing. They might have a taboo. Like, savage orcs don't wear armor and they don't use advanced materials. You know, they really look down on it and they think the old ways are best and it should be left that way. So they have a really strict taboo about not using any metal at all, and they very rarely wear armor. You know, they rely purely on their faith and their beliefs in, you know, it's always worked this way, there's no reason we should change it now. So, but as for the whole of the greenskin race, the only rule is you don't attack shamans. And sometimes that rule does get broken, but it's super duper rare. And it's a rule that all greenskins follow pretty well. Like, even Grimgor Ironhide is notoriously not tolerant of other greenskins. Like, if Grimgor goes a day without fighting, he will literally, I think the longest he's ever made it is 3 days without fighting. He will start killing his own comrades just to experience violence, to like calm himself down. But Grimgor is very hesitant about raising his axe against a shaman. You know, he hates Wurzag when they actually meet up in the end times. You know, he despises Wurzag, but he would never dare lay a finger on him. Like, Grimgor would not hurt Wurzag under almost any circumstance. And that tends to happen with a lot of shamans. There are exceptions, but most greenskins will not lay a finger on a shaman, just because that's kind of seen as attacking Gork and Mork, which would be a big no-no. And sometimes that rule goes out to other things. So, for instance, in the Skarsnik story, there is a 2-headed goblin that I talked about yesterday that normally the greenskins would kill for having a mutation, but either the shaman or the chief of the tribe sees it as like a blessing of Gork and Mork, so it's strictly forbidden for anyone to kill it. And it ends up living it dies eventually, but it lives a decently long time, until like some really hardcore scheme by Skarsnik accidentally gets it killed by one of Skarsnik's enemies. But hopefully that answers that question. Our next question comes in from Butt Munching Penguins. Great name, thank you for that. Ask, do the greenskins have any recorded history or folk tales about Sigmar and Gal Maraz? Or do they have any recorded history or folk tales of any kind? So, greenskins do not have recorded history, no. 99% of greenskins can't read or write. Like, Skarsnik and Gorfang Rockgut are two of the, like, only greenskins who know how to read and write. but and it's because they are both very intelligent and they deal with each other a lot. So Gorfang and Skarsnik are pretty much the only ones in that category who keep records and things like that. As for folktales, the Greenskins are heavy into folktales, and they rely upon their shamans who will use their sorcery to call upon some kind of weird mystical power within the winds of magic that manifests literal glowing green projections in the sky depicting the glorious victories of the Greenskins' racial history. And the kind of the funny thing about it is that the shamans never are able to select the story consciously. It's more like they tap into this weird racial memory, like a really deep ingrained one in every shaman, or something that flows through the Great Green, as they call it. And it just projects out this movie, essentially, of these larger-than-life war bosses who dominated some part of the world at one point or another. And it's through these really glorified storytelling experiences that the Greenskins have an excellent memory of the likes of Gorbad Ironclaw, Grom the Paunch, and Azhag the Slaughterer, etc. You know, that's how the story of certain war bosses spread around among Greenskins, is through those shaman storytelling sessions. As for Sigmar in particular, to most Greenskins, he's only known vaguely as a hammer-wielding Umi, a god who, you know, to them is just a joke. Orcs and Goblins are notorious for not remembering their own history very well, but they are especially forgetful of times when they lost. That being said, though, and I should note that, like, globally, most Greenskins have absolutely no idea who Sigmar is, and it's not relevant to them at all. It's only the Greenskins, you know, that live in the Badlands, or the Empire, or the mountains around that, you know, the ones that are in that ballpark in the old world. Most of them know who Sigmar is, if they've encountered any humans, but they don't remember him that well. There's only been one exception to that rule. And the one exception was there was a super famous and unique event that took place during the climax of the third battle for Blackfire Pass. And it was during this battle that Karl Franz dueled a huge orc war boss named Vorbad Ironjaw, who just like minutes before had killed the Elector Count Marius Leitdorf, who is easily one of my favorite Elector Counts because he was just crazy. But he dies during the third battle for Blackfire Pass. And when Karl Franz finally went toe-to-toe with Vorbad, this really weird thing happened. Because Vorbad was one of the most dead-ard, as the orcs would say, Greenskins seen in a really long time, especially way up in the Empire. And Karl Franz was no match for him in single combat. Even wielding Galmaraz or the Reichland Runefang, Karl Franz was getting the crap kicked out of him by Vorbad, because this orc was just huge. However, just when Karl Franz was basically beaten down onto his knees, he started praying to Sigmar, and Vorbad kind of gloated for a moment before going in for the killing blow. And in that moment, Franz basically let go of all of his hubris, and, you know, he tapped into the spirit of Sigmar, like, fully. Like, Karl Franz made a deep, genuine spiritual connection with his god through Galmaraz, which of course is the ultimate conduit of Sigmar's power. And something just happened where Galmaraz basically unlocked, because it's always been a really potent weapon, but for most of the Empire's history, after Sigmar died, Galmaraz was basically a glorified heirloom or a relic of office. It was a symbol. It wasn't really used as a weapon by none of the emperors between Franz and Sigmar used Galmaraz as a weapon in any notable battles. Even the really, really famous emperors who were like super badass not necessarily fighters, but they were like amazing generals who led the Empire to great victories during their time. You know, like Magnus the Pious, or Manfred Skavenslayer, both super badass emperors. Neither of them wielded Galmaraz it's unclear if they wielded it at any point during their lives, but they definitely did not wield it during the famous part of their lives. You know, Magnus the Pious didn't become emperor until after he had defeated Azavar Kul. And, you know, in some versions of that story, he personally killed Azavar Kul, which is absurd, but that's what happened, according to some people. And, you know, Mandred Skavenslayer he was essentially, you could kind of think of him as the Elector Count of Midden. I don't remember if he was actually the Elector Count of Middenland during the Black Plague crisis. I think his dad was. I don't remember if he inherited it or not. I'd have to go back and read it. I'm pretty sure he was. He was the Graf of Middenheim, at least. But he also, super badass, did a ton of crazy stuff. Never wielded Galmaraz. I'm pretty sure he died from being assassinated by a Skaven before he had a chance to wield Galmaraz. So, you have this hammer that is basically seen as this really glorified symbol of office. Like, it's a rune hammer, it's strong, but none of the emperors were able to wield it in any meaningful way until Franz. And so when Vorbad went in for the killing blow against Franz, and Franz just managed to finally tap into the, like, religious power that was, like, deep hidden in Galmaraz, it fully woke up. And when that happened, Vorbad had this, like his vision was completely overwhelmed, where he had seen this kind of diminutive Umi standing, I think Umi, which I don't remember if they do the H or not. I like to me it sounds like they say Umi, but I'm not Cockney, so what do I know? But he went from seeing Franz, who was not that physically impressive to him, to all of a sudden seeing this, like, big barbarian dude wielding this huge hammer who was just coming right at him. And Vorbad, for the first time in his entire long life, felt terror, because he was literally having a flashback to when Sigmar Heldenhammer crushed the Greenskins at the first Battle of Blackfire Pass, and he killed that super duper nasty Black Orc war boss who was leading that invasion. And while he was, like, having this horrifying, almost racial recollection of facing the man god Sigmar, that gave Franz enough time to basically stand up and swing Galmaraz, and with a single hit, just killed Vorbad. Literally just hit up, like, he made Galmaraz live up to its name of Skull Smasher, because that's exactly what happened. Vorbad just got, like, his head just got completely imploded by Galmaraz in that single swing. And that was a really, really critical moment in Warhammer Fantasy history, especially for the Empire and the Greenskins, because that was a big deal. And that allowed the Empire to win the third Battle of Blackfire Pass. So, if a Greenskin is confronted, it seems, by, like, a massive amount of faith wielded by a worshipper of Sigmar, there is at least a possibility that the Greenskins might have some kind of instinctual flashback to getting their butts whooped by Sigmar a really, really long time ago. But that seems to be the only time they really pay that story any notice. So, hopefully that answers your question. Jarek von Lassenhelm, I think is what that says, asks, are the Blue Viper tribe canon, and how did they get to Lustria? Did they use the Clan Pestilence undertunnels? So, first of all, yes, the Blue Vipers are a canon Savage Orc tribe. But there are a ton of Savage Orcs in Lustria. I mean, a ton. In fact, in the year 594 BS, or 594 before Sigmar or before Sotek, whichever one you want to go for. So 594 years before the Empire was founded, there was a conflict in Lustria called the Shrunken Head War. And it lasted for a century, Well, actually, I think it wrapped up in 594. So it started in 694 and wrapped up in 594. And it was a century-long war where six big war tribes of savage orcs on the Scorpion coast of Lestria got riled up into a WAAAH, and they just started going apeshit against the lizardmen and anybody else that happened to be there. So there was this huge, crazy conflict, and it was finally resolved when Krokgar was unleashed on them by the Slán. And Krokgar showed up, and over the course of that century, when he finally got involved, the way that he ended the war was that he tracked down every single tribe's war boss and personally defeated and decapitated them in close combat to basically break the spirits of all the greenskins and scattered them all to the far reaches of Lestria. But as for the second part of your question, no, the orcs beat the Skaven to Lestria by a long shot. The orcs were already a problem for Lestria before chaos even existed. So the orcs were there thousands and thousands of years before the Skaven, but they got there via, all the spores raining down from the sky or traveling through the Old Ones' technology and their machines. They didn't walk there from the Old World. They just kind of were everywhere. So, in fact, the Greenskins might have even been on the war because they traveled there with the Old Ones unintentionally. The Greenskins may well have been there before the Warhammer Fantasy World was split from its... When the Old Ones originally arrived, the Warhammer Fantasy planet had a supercontinent, or what we know as Pandora. So, no, not Pandora. Gosh, what do we call it? It starts with a P, but anyway, you know what I mean. There was a supercontinent, and I think it was the first and second generation Slán. So Mazda Money was present for this. I don't remember if the third generation was in on it or not, but a certain amount of Slán, once they had been spawned, assisted the Old Ones with basically, well, I think they might have done it without the Old Ones, but the Old Ones told them to do it. They used their geomancy to break up the supercontinent and move all the continents into the shape of the world that we now know as the Warhammer Fantasy World. So by that point, I'm pretty sure the Greenskins may have already been there. I'd have to double check a couple things, but that would likely explain how they kind of got everywhere. But they're basically cockroaches. You can't get rid of them. All right, our next question comes from Stiety180, who asks, with the Greenskins respecting strength and cunning, is it possible for someone other than a Greenskin to lead them? Say a vampire or ogre, maybe a dark elf, if they seem like the best candidate to be able to beat Greenskins into submission and lead them. And he asks, I know Chaos Dwarfs enslave various kinds of Greenskins. I mean, would they willingly follow a warlord who's not Greenskin? So this question I'm going to go really, really hard into when we get to the mercenary chapter. There's a lot of questions about Greenskins as mercenaries that we're going to hit on. But I'm considering this a cultural question, so we'll knock it out now. The problem with Greenskins is that they are very, very particular about how the strength and cunning are demonstrated by whoever their boss is. This is mentioned by how they admire what they call brutal cunning and cunning brutality, which are the two ultimate pillars of Greenskins society. So, although they appreciate someone who is cunning and brutal, it has to be a proper form of those two ideals. Azhag, for example, was actually very controversial among Greenskins, and we talked about this a few minutes earlier. He was very controversial among the Greenskins in his WAAAH because a lot of his troops accused him of not being orky enough. Now, they never accused him to his face because they were terrified of him, but a lot of them were not super into it because Azhag had this bizarre habit of using actual tactics, which Greenskins were very weirded out by. And of course, his mannerisms when the Crown of Nagash would take over were super weird for orcs. He would talk with this really... He would become very verbose and use, correct grammar, and his whole manner of speaking became really weird whenever the Crown of Sorcery would take over, and the Greenskins really didn't like that. Ultimately, they didn't rebel against him because he just kept winning. But if Azhag had ever even lost a single fight, the greenskins of his WAAAH would have instantly turned on him. Because he was just super strange. But they weren't going to mess with him so long as he kept bringing them in victories. So the thing about greenskin culture is that on top of that, and the reason why you wouldn't see like a vampire or any other race leading those greenskins is because you are constantly being challenged in greenskin society. Scarsnake and Grimgore, for instance, have to deal with constant challenges from like new arrivals coming in, and you know, a tribe will show up led by some big, you know, puffed up orc or really conniving nasty goblin, and they will attempt to essentially kill them. You know, an orc will come at you in an outright challenge, whereas some goblins may attempt to see you have a nasty accident. But the moment, and that's for two guys who are like really well liked and like practically worshipped by greenskin culture. The moment you introduce a non-greenskin into the mix, the greenskins would have absolutely none of that. They're not going to follow a boss who's not a greenskin. Because to them, it's a very deep insult. It's just an absolute violation of their culture to an extent. Which, in a way, greenskins are fairly racist for a bunch of just violent man-eating mushrooms. But, you know, that's how it goes. So ultimately, greenskins are very, very not smart creatures. They're pretty stupid. And they just don't wrap their brains really well around the concept of halting their violence against non-greenies for beneficial reasons, even for like things that would be easy for them to understand, like trade or bribes. Like some greenskins are, you know, Gorfang Rotgut is really, really powerful because he's an orc that understands the concept of trading and bribing. And he's willing to accept bribes from people in order to travel through his land safely. And a lot of greenskins picked up on that and started, you know, that became like a normalcy, a sense of normalness in their culture, in that they will accept bribes in order not to attack you. But a lot of people rely on ogre mercenaries because, you know, greenskins very rarely keep their word on that. And pause for a second. Alright, sorry if there's a weird jump there. There's a storm going, and Chloe, my dog, is scared of storms, so she came and smashed open my door for a minute. So, yeah, we answered that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. So, I think this will be our last, probably second to last question. Our next question comes from Zhao Fang, who asks, do greenskins value gold and wealth, or do they steal from dwarves, etc., just to troll them? It depends on the individual. Most greenskins are extremely fond of shiny things, but don't understand well the concept of wealth. The biggest exception to this would probably be Gorfang Rotgut, who is notoriously greedy for an orc, and he loves gold. Funny enough, that's a big reason why Gorfang is known as the Squatter King, because very unusually for an orc, he's not at all interested in leading a huge WAAAH or doing some grand conquest, but instead he just chills out in Blackcrag and extorts anyone wanting to use the Silk Road for safe passage, and by doing so became hilariously rich, because Gorfang likes the finer things in life, despite being a colossal orc decked head to toe in armor. Like, he does enjoy fighting, but Gorfang has a surprisingly sophisticated taste for an orc, and that, like, he is really big on, like, for an orc, fine dining. He genuinely is interested in entertainment and a bunch of other crazy things. But, that being said, when greenskins love looting. Like, looting is a huge part of greenskin culture. They love looking for people's treasures and all that other stuff. But the main reason they do that is that when greenskins do acquire a load of loot, most of what they'll do with it is all the best bosses of that tribe will basically equip themselves with whatever they find. Like, you know, if they find any shields or armor, they'll beat it onto their frame or try and force it onto themselves. You know, a lot of greenskins will notoriously, you know, will find a suit of dwarven armor, and because they can't fit in it, they'll break it apart and like put all the different pieces on parts of their body where they're fixed. So instead of using a shoulder guard as a proper shoulder guard, they might use the chest plate for a shoulder guard, and maybe the original shoulder guard will cover the palm of their fist or their wrist or something or whatever. Or they'll use it as a crotch piece more than likely, but you know, you never know with orcs. But so a lot of greenskins will just put on whatever they find, and they try and find things they can use as weapons, especially like magic items and stuff. Most magic items that greenskins wield are basically just looted from other races and either beaten into a shape that's more pleasing to a greenskin, or maybe a shaman messes with it to change what it does. But the biggest thing is that with loot, you make yourself look as flashy and powerful as possible, because you got to look nice and flashy to really impress all the lads. So that being said, of all the greenskins I can think of, Skarsnik and Gorfang are probably the only two that actively desire wealth, and because they use it. You know, Skarsnik and Gorfang are really big on purchasing the services of other things like weapons, food, mercenaries, entertainment, wine and drink. Like, they will actively buy things from people using wealth. So hopefully that answers your question. And today's last question for today comes from Feather Freaks, who asks, have there been any hobgoblins that stayed in the old world besides working for the Chaos Dwarves after the Black Orc Rebellion, and are there any famous ones besides the Khan? So, real quick, the old world does not extend into the Darklands, so there are no hobgoblins in the old world. So what we call the World's Edge Mountains, which is that huge mountain range that runs like this, at the eastern edge of the old world. So it goes from way up by Kislev, or it kind of goes into Norska a little bit, and it goes not proper Norska, but it goes above Kislev, and it goes all the way down into the Southlands until it reaches that ocean down there. That is the reason it's called the World's Edge Mountains, is because that's literally the edge of the old world. But the hobgoblins, the hobgoblins are deeply, deeply hated by all of the greenskins due to just being the worst when it comes to backstabbing, relentless backstabbing. As such, they are kept in the Far East by sheer force, with their main opponents, the hobgoblins' main opponents, being random tribes of greenskins in the Darklands, or the goblin wolf riders that you will find in the Wolflands, who dominate. The Wolflands are kind of the western edge of the Darklands. So thankfully, for the rest of the old world, hobgoblins almost never cross the border of the World's Edge Mountains, just because they'll be like killed by anybody and everybody that finds them. And when it comes to famous ones, fortunately or unfortunately, there hasn't been any famous hobgoblins outside of the Hobgoblins. A lot of people think that Gatilla the Hunter, who is a greenskin special character, is a hobgoblin. He's not. He is a wolf riding goblin. So he's a regular goblin from the Wolflands. If anything, he would be one of the main opponents, ancestral opponents of the hobgoblins, who most of the hobgoblins come from way further east. Like, most of the hobgoblins, you have the World's Edge Mountains, then you have World's Edge Mountains, Darklands, Mountains of Morn. Over here is where the hobgoblins have their empire. And so you very rarely see them outside of working with the Chaos Dwarves. But in any event, there's a huge storm here, and we're past our time, so that's a good time to call it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed yourselves and are learning lots of little orky tidbits. We will be back tomorrow, where we're going to be diving in really, really heavily on greenskin culture. So see you guys for then. Bye.